Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. Today we are going to have a full discussion of the Microtech MSI. This is a very favorite knife of mine, certainly a favorite Microtech, and there are a number of different reasons for that. So we're going to talk about them in the video. It's not the most perfect knife that's ever existed or anything like that. We're going to talk about a couple little things that I could see being a little bit better. Or a wish list that I could maybe have for this knife. I've been a little slow getting to this, mostly because I was waiting for these scales. These scales are from Shepherd Custom Creations, and he's done a really nice job. They popped right on there without any difficulty. Now, the takedown on this can be a little bit of a headache. We'll talk about that when we get to handle and construction. But for now, let's go ahead and get to size and weight, and then we'll run through the features. All right, so there we go. Got a nice ruler out there. So you can see this is basically 9 inches overall. There we go. You can see this is basically 9 inches overall, 4 inches of blade, 5 inches of handle, almost a half inches of cutting edge. Grip area is going to be 3 3/4, and you can choke up on this if you want to do so. So that's going to create an option for those of you who have really even larger hands than me. I will say for me, this feels pretty good in a standard grip. If I choke up, it's okay as well. Just you're gonna have to exercise some care if you're doing that. All right, in terms of weight, let's measure this. I don't think I've measured this since putting the other scales on. 5.45 ounces. That's pretty good as far as I'm concerned. I think I've said this before. I feel like a broken record even bringing it up, but as long as something's under 7.5, even under 8 ounces, I don't really get that stressed about it. I have enough knives that I can switch out to different options that I may want to carry depending on what I'm wearing. And I will readily admit to you that yes, some knives are going to be a little too heavy to wear in, like, I don't know, lightweight golf pants or workout pants or something like that. And that's just the nature of the beast. You may have to switch your knife based on the construction and weight of the clothing that you're wearing on a given day. All right, so that's size and weight on this. Let's go ahead and run through the features here. Up front, we've got a stone-washed blade with flat satin on the flats, sort of a reverse Tanto style blade, fairly thick blade stock. All right, we're looking at 1/8 of an inch, actually a little over an 1/8 of an inch there, so fairly hefty, which for me is something that I actually do appreciate. M390 steel, this has held up really well. Now, there have been some complaints about Microtech's heat treat, how hard they're taking it. I will say we're in kind of a weird spot where the community is a little obsessed with how hard a steel can be and how much edge retention they can get out of it. And hey, I get it. I want good edge retention as well. But sometimes we forget that there may be other qualities that we're aiming at instead of edge retention. Maybe we want a little more toughness, whatever the case may be. And so some companies feel, Chris Reeve famously, feels that, the best hardness for their customers is going to be like 59 HRC, right? So I'm not going to get into that debate in this video, other than to say I've used this, I've carried this, I've done quite a bit of cutting with it, and it's held up very well. All right. Has it held up the very optimally that M390 could hold up? I have no idea, because I don't have another MSI with optimally heat treated M390 that I could compare it to, or one in MagnaCut or one in S90V or something else. Okay. At this point, this is the only steel you're going to get in this, and so it's comparable to itself. And really, the way I gauge heat treatment is the way I gauge edge retention in general is I use the knife regularly. If I feel like, man, I'm having to sharpen this way more than I think I should, then I'm going to complain a little bit about it. But if it holds up fairly well for what it is and for the price that I paid, then I'm not going to complain about it. All right, that's how I do that. In terms of the edge geometry, this is a little thick behind the edge. It's definitely a blade that's ground to be tough, and I 100% get that. I do have a little, it's not a pool noodle, it's actually an insulator for drain pipe, but it works pretty well in kind of talking about this because you can see, how hard you have to press in. So I'm able to kind of cut into this with this as well as a couple other things. So here is a cold steel code 4. Here is this is a MagnaCut. This is the tactile turn. Very slim blade here. So I'm dropping into another hole. All right. The point that I'm trying to show here is, with a really, really obtuse angle and a really, really thick blade, I don't have a good example of that around here. Here's another fairly thick blade with a fairly thick grind. Okay. And you can see again, let me turn this. All right. They're actually fairly similar, the 8015 and the Microtech. All right. So that brings me to one minor thing that I would like to see, and I say this about every sort of thicker, heavier knife that I talk about, but I can imagine in a dream scenario where, every company would just, email me when I bought a knife and say, oh, are there any minor changes we could make to your knife before we ship it out to you? And one of the minor changes I would make here is just do like a slight hollow grind. Sort of like what they do on the Inkosi. If you could do a slight hollow grind on here, oh my goodness, it would just be magnificent. Okay, I know not all of you are fans of hollow grinds, but I love it. I just find it's the best way to optimize slicey cutting performance and still get a thick, robust, confidence-inspiring blade stock. Okay, so that's going to be my blade discussion. Moving on to the action. You can see the action on this is pretty enjoyable. The lockup is very solid, no movement of any kind in any direction. We've got a big thick stop pin right there. We have the ram lock, which is Microtech's version of the axis lock. You can look up there and you can see the interface. Well, maybe if the thing would focus. There you go. You can see the interface where that lock is popping onto the back of the blade tang there. All right. One of the things I always talk about is whether or not you can single finger move a lock. That's one of the things I find. I tend to, just because of the shape of this handle, I tend to want to do 2 fingers. I kind of have to almost work harder to get this finger out of the way. So it's just easier in this case. But the action is very good. The lockup is very good. A couple things that I want to point out here, and that is this does have dual row bearings in it, which if you're making, if you want to use bearings in a heavier duty, harder use type of knife, I think that's kind of a minimum requirement. It drives me a little bit crazy when people don't do this. I know I'm going to get some knife makers in the comments who are like, Kevin, you're being unfair. And maybe I am, but a number of years ago, like we're probably talking 8 or 10 years ago, Shirogorov did a bunch of testing where they loaded their pivots and tested how the distribution of weight works. And certainly, in a surprise to no one, more bearings distributes the weight more evenly and makes the pivot a little bit stronger. Okay, it also increases the amount of contact here, meaning there's more stability, right? So just think about, if you're going to stack some stuff on top of each other, you want it to be as stable as possible, right? If I stack my hands this way, I've got a certain amount of stability. Now, if I turn and stack them this way, right, the wide way, it's stronger the greater that distance is, okay? So I prefer dual row, multi-row bearing systems over single row bearing systems, and that's just going to be the way it is, okay? And so this does have multi-row bearings, and because of that, among other things, okay, it works really, really well. So I'm pretty happy. I will say, yes, there was a bit of lock stick with this ram lock at the start. A number of you who watched my initial video of this said, oh, that'll go away over time. And you were correct. It did go away over time. All right, moving down to the handle. Now, this is going to be a little bit different because it's not wearing its original scales. Although, again, remember, this is available in fluted G10, and there might be a couple other variations of G10 that you can get this from factory. There are a number of other aftermarket places doing scales for these, so that is always an option. For me, there weren't, when I bought this, there weren't a lot of these available out there. I was able to pick up the green FRN version and then go ahead and get scales after. Now, I will say one thing, certain scale options and certain blade finish options tend to go together. So while I'm a big fan of satin blades, the stone wash seems to be the associated blade finish with the FRN. So if you want something different, you may have to look for a different handle material. All right. So that was the process. I do want to point out this was a little tough. A takedown wasn't the end of the world, and certainly it did fit back together nicely, but all of these screws are going to be Loctited, and you're going to have to exercise a certain amount of care and caution as you take it apart. Now, on the bright side, these are all screwed into these are all independently threaded. So you're not, so this is screwed in and then there's a second screw on this side screwing in. So each of these is its own independent screw on its own. That's an advantage because it allows you to sort of take apart the knife one layer at a time, and you don't end up with one side being loose. You can leave this side tight, take this side off, put this side back on, turn it over, leave this side, tighten this off, take this side off, and put it back on. So it actually isn't bad to put together because of that very reason, the two sides coming together. The only screw that doesn't do that is the pivot screw. And in this case, I'm pretty sure they must all come this way. The screw that moves is on the clip side. All right. So you got to pull it out from here. If you try to take it out from here, this is a D-shaped pivot. It's not going to work for you. All right. By the way, one of the changes that happens when you get certain custom scales, in my case, I thought the show side looked a little better as well this way. There's no possibility. There's no spot for switching your clip. All right, so if you're going to get custom scales, you got to make sure that if you're a lefty, you make that arrangement in advance. All right, by the way, we've got stainless steel back here. The clip is okay. All right, they've got this extra bump to give some extra retention, and it certainly does that. Again, when I said I wish there were a couple little things that I could, change, one of those things is those screws are really annoying, and I have some pants that have thicker pockets where it actually bumps into the screws and I've got to fight a little bit to get it in. They should have gone with flush fitting screws here. It just would have been much cleaner of a look, but also it would have been much more functional. There's plenty of space. Like, look at how much nice open space you'd have there for a pair of 511s or Carhartts or something else with a thick pocket seam. But because they went with these great big screws, I end up getting this stuck on certain pants. So that would have been nice to see, is flush fitting screws there. Everyone else, $50 folders from China have figured out the flush fitting screws. So Microtech, you kind of need to do that as well. Okay, so those are the features, functions. I will say overall, this knife, the ergonomics are quite good. Very confidence inspiring. It feels great in a saber grip, feels pretty good in a hammer grip. All right, it's tough and durable, and really this is a knife where I feel like I could get quite a lot of work done if I needed to. Okay, I can choke up again, as I mentioned before, if I need to. Don't always do that. But in terms of comfort of use, very, very good. We already weighed this, so we know it's not crazy to carry. The only complaint about carry is the way that pocket clip could have been done differently. I'll give you, here's the Kaiser bag letter XL. See how those are nice and flush? That would have been the way to do these screws as well. Okay, now I want to get to some comparisons, because this knife I feel like has a special place in the Microtech lineup. It's way more affordable than a lot of the stuff they're doing, especially in the FRN version, which means a lot of people who are, not buying high-end knives could easily get their hands on one of these. For I think these are like $175 US. that's a little more than say a Recon 1 or an 8010 or something like that, but it's not a crazy amount more, which makes this very very compelling as a hard use or large tactical folder option. Hold on, see if I can make a little more room here. There we go. How does this compare to other options that we might put in this category? And, is it going to replace the Recon One? I don't think so. All right, it's going to certainly provide a compelling alternative. All right, that if you want a little more, something a little cooler, something a little more fidget friendly, certainly this might be attractive to a lot of people because the price point is right there. Okay, um, so that needs to be, I think, generally speaking, if someone says to me, Kevin, I want a hard use, a tactical folder, something heavy duty that I can take in the woods, that I can take fishing or hunting, I'm going to recommend the Recon One. Now, those fishing and hunting applications, I'm also going to recommend a fixed blade, a fillet knife, or whatever the case may be that's appropriate. Um, but the knife that when I'm hunting, I don't only want my skinning knife, but I want a good knife in my pocket for doing other tasks. All right, and that's going to be something like this. And I think this works really really well as a competitor to something heavy duty hard use that can really do a whole lot. The other thing that I think this does is, in addition to being very practical, very useful in that regard, it also gets a lot of cool points, which means it also competes really well with the 8015, one of my favorite knives. I just love the 8015. It creates a really compelling option for someone who wants something a little bit different, a little bit interesting. Um, and by the way, the 8015 is a little closer, I think, in price point these days, most places. We could probably pull in the military as well. Okay. Again, doing some things differently. This is going to be a little slicier. It's going to be a little lighter weight, but in terms of a large capable folder, yeah, this is a pretty darn good option. I do want to pull in, so I don't have a lot of axis lock knives, but certainly the Benchmade Crooked River is in a similar vein, similar lock. Very utilitarian knife as far as I'm concerned. This is one of those knives that I would put up there with the Recon One and the 8010 and a few others that are just useful cutting tools that can do a whole lot of get a whole lot of work done. Okay, so competes pretty well with that. Um, I did throw in the bag letter earlier. Let's bring it in now. In terms of strength and durability, the bag letter is not going to quite compete with the MSI, but it's pretty darn good. Button locks are not going to be as strong, generally speaking, as a crossbar style lock. This is also, though, on dual row ceramic bearings, which is fantastic. It's still quite large. The blade steel is also not going to be in the same category, but if you want something that's equally large and similar, and even in a similar role, but not quite as expensive, this might be a good option for you. Okay, of course, we've got to bring in the Microtech Stitch. Little bit different here in terms of certainly price point. These are a little more dear, and there's not a budget version of the Stitch. Okay. These are also going to be not quite as utilitarian. Okay, this is just a great everyman's knife. It can fill a whole bunch of roles. This knife, you've got to kind of like this styling. If you're a fan of Borka blades, you probably really like this. If you like this overall style, again, you probably really like this. But if you don't, right, if you're more of a conventional knife guy, then the MSI is probably much more interesting and compelling to you. And I totally get that. The other thing, so we've talked about where this kind of fits in the knife world. That the other thing I've got to say here is, this is a really interesting Microtech because they are not known for catering to the budget crowd at all. Okay, it's like doesn't even they don't even give it a second thought when their knife is like, their cheapest model starts at $500. Okay, now that's, again, I know that that's a little bit different these days. Certainly, this knife has got to be, if this is not the cheapest thing Microtech has ever offered, someone put in the comments down there what else is out there that puts you in a more affordable option to get your hands on a Microtech. Um, so I think that's interesting as well. It sure sounds like the sales on these have been pretty good, considering especially how difficult they were to get initially. Nowadays, they're pretty well everywhere. And if the sales keep up, then I suspect we'll see more in this genre from Microtech, and I think that would be a really good thing because this is a really great, like, this checks a lot of boxes for me, and to have more knives similar to this but different designs, I think would be really, really cool. All right, so the last question we got to ask is, should you buy one? Well, first of all, take a look at it. If you look at it and you go, that's a pretty cool looking knife, then that's a compelling reason. If you look at it and go, that's the ugliest thing I've ever seen, I can't imagine why anyone would carry one, well, then obviously don't buy it. If you like good knives, if you like reliable knives, if you like good action, if you like good performance, comfort in hand, if you want something that competes well with some of those cold steels we talked about and some of the other harder use options, if that's your genre of knife, then you'll probably really enjoy this. All right. If you're sort of the lightweight EDC type of guy who, starts to think that even, something like the tactile turn Maverick is a bit big for you, well, you're definitely going to hate the MSI. Okay, so hopefully that gives you enough information to go on. Hopefully that tells you why I enjoy this knife, and essentially, and also, sorry, I'm tripping over my words here, but also lets you understand whether or not you would enjoy it as much as me, and whether or not this is something you should be saving up for or trying to get your hands on as well. Thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We will talk to you soon.